Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't really about mental illness at all. It was about people. Specifically, about a rare kind of person who can see everything that others miss, and why that variability often ends up destroying them. In his clinical practice, Jung kept encountering individuals who possessed what he later described as differentiated perception. These weren't people with hallucinations or delusions. They were people who could detect the subtle cues most of us ignore. Tiny shifts in body language, flashes of hidden emotion, patterns of behavior that pointed to deeper truths. They could sense the psychological atmosphere in a room the moment they entered it. They could pick up on lies without evidence, notice tensions that no one spoke aloud, and read people almost like open books. On the surface, this might sound like a superpower. But Jung didn't see it that way. He called it dangerous. Because time after time, the people with this ability ended up isolated, burned out, and unable to maintain normal relationships. Not because they were unstable, but because their vision cut too deep. Think about it. If you can see through everyone's social masks, if you sense what others are hiding, how do you make small talk? How do you pretend everything's fine when you can feel the pain, the resentment, or the dishonesty right under the surface? For Jung, the issue wasn't that these people were broken. The issue was that they were too conscious. Their perception operated at such a high level that it became socially dangerous. Today, I want to walk you through Jung's most dangerous discovery, why some people are wired to see everything, why that ability can either destroy them or transform them into something extraordinary, and what Jung believed they must do to survive. The patient who saw too much. The story begins in 1913, a crucial year for Jung. He had just broken with Freud and was going through his own intense psychological crisis. Around this time, a patient came to him, someone who would shape one of his most striking discoveries. In his private notes, Jung described her as highly introverted and strongly intuitive. What set her apart was something Jung later called undifferentiated intuitive perception. The moment she entered a room, she could tell who was lying, who was in pain, who secretly resented whom. She could map the invisible emotional field that connected everyone. Jung wrote of her, "The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage. Her problem wasn't depression or neurosis or delusion. Her problem was that she could see too much. She struggled with ordinary life. Small talk was impossible. She couldn't tolerate the falseness of it. Friendships slipped away because people felt exposed around her. Even holding a steady job became nearly impossible because her presence disrupted the unconscious agreements that allowed groups to function smoothly." Jung realized something important. He wasn't treating an illness. He was witnessing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception is so finely tuned that it actually threatens social survival. Seeing clearly and becoming a target. The patient had an unnerving ability to describe others with startling accuracy. Jung would test her impressions through careful questioning, and again, her perceptions proved correct. This wasn't psychosis. This was advanced consciousness, and it terrified Jung, because he saw that such clarity came with a steep psychological cost. Why? Because people who can see unconscious truths in others inevitably become targets. Jung discovered that when you reflect someone's hidden emotions, their unacknowledged flaws, or their buried pain, they usually don't thank you for it. Instead, they attack you. He called this shadow projection, the process where people unload their own unwanted qualities onto the person who mirrors them. Jung famously wrote, Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people don't want that understanding. It's far easier to blame the person who exposed the shadow than to integrate it. This is why the highly perceptive often become scapegoats. They're treated as the problem in every group, not because they cause issues, but because they reveal what others don't want to see. As Jung put it, the bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. 4 variations of the seer. Type. As Jung studied more cases, he noticed something fascinating. Not every person with this gift experienced it in the same way. Within his typology, he identified 4 distinct variations of the introverted intuitive type. People who all share heightened perception, but process it differently. Type 1. The feeling. Intuitive. These people not only sense what's happening around them, they feel it in their bodies. They soak up other people's emotions so completely that they can't always tell where their own feelings end and someone else's begin. Jung described them as living in a constant state of emotional contagion. Type 2. The thinking intuitive. This type notices unconscious patterns and can predict outcomes with eerie accuracy. They'll sense when a relationship is heading for collapse or when someone is on the verge of breakdown, not by reasoning it out, but by intuitively grasping the logic of unconscious processes before others can. Type 3. The sensation. Intuitive. These people pick up psychological states as physical sensations. They can sense illness before symptoms appear, feel someone's exhaustion before it's admitted, or notice the bodily tension that reveals hidden distress. They serve as early warning systems for the people around them. Type 4. The pure intuitive. The rarest of all. These individuals perceive everything but struggle to organize or express it. They live in a state of overwhelm, bombarded with unconscious information that they can't structure. They see more than almost anyone else, but they lack the tools to make sense of it. Jung emphasized that each variation comes with unique struggles, and that understanding your own type is the first step toward survival. Why Jung called it dangerous. So why exactly did Jung call this discovery dangerous? Because he saw how destructive this level of perception could become without integration. He identified 3 major dangers. Danger 1, disrupting the collective unconscious. Every group, whether a family or a society, holds itself together through unspoken agreements. Illusions everyone quietly agrees not to challenge. Highly perceptive people break those agreements simply by being who they are. They expose what isn't supposed to be seen, which destabilizes the group. Danger 2. Psychological isolation. Jung called this the problem of the superior function. When your greatest strength is something that separates you from others, you become cut off. Many highly perceptive people describe feeling like they live in a different reality entirely. Danger 3. Loss of identity. Perhaps the greatest danger is what Jung called participation mystique, when someone absorbs so much of other people's unconscious material that they lose track of their own identity. They stop knowing where they end and others begin. This isn't just social exile. It's the risk of psychological annihilation. For Jung, this meant that people with advanced perception weren't just at risk of loneliness. They were at risk of losing themselves completely. This is where Jung's concept of individuation became essential, the process he designed to help people with overwhelming perception not only survive, but transform. We left off with Jung's warning. People with highly differentiated perception face 3 major dangers: disrupting the unconscious agreements of society, sinking into psychological isolation, and losing their sense of identity through participation mystique. But Jung wasn't just diagnosing a problem. He was also mapping out a solution. He wanted to know, how can people who see everything survive in a world that isn't built to handle their level of consciousness? The answer became the heart of his life's work, the process of individuation. The first step, recognition and differentiation. For Jung, survival began with a deceptively simple practice, learning to recognize what belongs to you and what doesn't. He noticed that many of his patients with superior perception carried enormous amounts of emotional weight that wasn't actually theirs. They had absorbed it from others unconsciously. A friend's depression, a parent's resentment, a colleague's fear, it all lived inside them as if it were their own. Jung taught what he called conscious discrimination, pausing to ask, is this really mine? He instructed some of his patients to spend time in complete solitude every day, not to isolate forever, but to let all the borrowed material settle so they could hear their own authentic voice again. Without this step, individuation was impossible. As Jung wrote, the first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development. The second step, shadow integration. But recognition wasn't enough. Jung discovered that many people who see the shadows in others struggle because they haven't dealt with their own shadows. The more you deny your own flaws, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing those flaws in everyone else. If you can't admit that you too are capable of selfishness, deceit, or cruelty, you'll project that discomfort onto the people around you. Jung pushed his patients to turn their perception inward. He taught them to recognize that every quality they observed in others also lived in themselves, not to shame themselves, but to become whole. As he put it, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Shadow integration meant owning the full range of human traits, even the ugly ones, so that seeing them in others no longer felt threatening. This was the difference between being overwhelmed by perception and using it constructively. The third step, conscious participation. Finally, came what Jung considered the most advanced stage, learning how to participate in collective life consciously without being consumed by it. He called this conscious participation in the collective unconscious. It meant engaging with people's hidden emotions and unconscious material, but holding it with boundaries. Jung encouraged his patients to think of themselves as containers. They could temporarily hold what others projected onto them. But they had to remain aware. This is not mine. I am only holding it for a moment. This shift allowed highly perceptive individuals to interact with others without collapsing under the weight of what they absorbed. Lessons from history. Collapse versus transformation. Jung didn't stop at clinical cases. He looked at history to understand why some people with advanced perception crumbled while others transformed it into wisdom. The case of Nietzsche. Jung admired Nietzsche's brilliant insights but saw him as a tragic example of what happens when perception isn't integrated. Nietzsche's ability to see through cultural illusions was unmatched. But Jung argued that Nietzsche identified too strongly with his superior function. He became the prophet rather than the person. His insights became weapons instead of tools for healing. Eventually, the pressure of this unintegrated vision broke him. Jung wrote of Nietzsche, he possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, but he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. The case of Meister Eckhart. In contrast, Jung often pointed to Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic, as an example of successful integration. Eckhart also saw deeply into human and spiritual realities, but instead of alienating people, he translated his perceptions into wisdom, that nourished others. Jung admired Eckhart's conscious humility, his ability to share profound truths gently, without demanding recognition or forcing insight on those who weren't ready. Jung's own struggle. Perhaps the most dramatic example was Jung himself. Between 1913 and 1919, he entered what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. His own perception became so overwhelming that he feared slipping into psychosis. What saved him, he wrote, was the very process he was developing with his patients, treating his perceptions not as pathology, but as evolutionary material. They weren't there to destroy him. They were there to push consciousness forward. The importance of finding the few who understand. Even with individuation practices, Jung warned that no one with advanced perception could survive entirely alone. The burden was too great. He stressed the need to find what he called the few who understand. These were people who could meet differentiated perception without fear, defensiveness, or projection. Jung identified 3 categories of such relationships: fellow individuated people, those who had gone through the process themselves. They could meet you as equals with no masks. Jung called these connections rare but essential. Those engaged in the work, people actively doing inner work, therapy, or spiritual practice. They might not have superior perception themselves, but they understood its value and could handle it. Natural containers, grounded individuals with a kind of psychological stability that allowed them to hold others' emotions without being overwhelmed. These were often older, wiser people who had endured life's storms. How to recognize safe relationships. Jung even developed a kind of protocol for revealing perceptive abilities. He urged his patients to start small, offering gentle observations and watching closely for how the other person responded. Safe people, he said, could acknowledge their contradictions without shame, stay stable when confronted with uncomfortable truths, and show genuine curiosity about growth. Unsafe people would become defensive, hostile, or dismissive. The key was to reveal perception gradually, never dumping the full weight of it onto someone unprepared. As Jung put it, insights should be framed as offerings, not pronouncements. The path of transformation. If these steps were followed, Jung believed superior perception could shift from curse to gift. He outlined 4 stages of transformation. Stage 1, recognition without overwhelm. Accepting that you have this ability without being crushed by it. Jung called this conscious acceptance of the superior function. Stage 2, integration without isolation. Learning to use perception constructively while still maintaining relationships. Individuation didn't mean withdrawal. It meant deeper engagement with life. Stage 3, service without sacrifice. Turning perception into something you can offer others without losing yourself in the process. Jung warned against martyrdom. The goal was to serve from strength. Stage 4, legacy without attachment. At the highest level, perception becomes cultural medicine. You use it for the good of humanity, not for personal validation. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to embody higher consciousness without ego inflation. The pitfalls along the way, but Jung also warned of traps that could derail the journey. The inflation trap, believing you're a prophet or savior. Jung called this the prophet complex. It leads to arrogance and isolation. The withdrawal, justification, using perception as an excuse to avoid society. True individuation required engagement, not escape. The helper's identity, losing yourself by defining your entire being around helping others. This, Jung said, was the opposite of individuation. The overwhelm return. Even integrated individuals could regress during stress, becoming flooded again with others' unconscious material. Integration, Jung emphasized, was never a one-time achievement, but a lifelong practice. We've covered the dangers of differentiated perception, the individuation practices Jung developed to help people survive it, and the pitfalls that can derail the process. Now we come to Jung's final insight, perhaps the most important of all. Superior perception is not a curse. It's an evolutionary gift, but it only becomes a gift if it's integrated wisely. The role of consciousness. Pioneers. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung wrote, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society. He believed that certain individuals are born ahead of their time, equipped with perception that goes beyond what the collective can yet handle. These people are what he called consciousness pioneers, individuals whose psychological development serves as a kind of laboratory for the future of humanity." Throughout history, Jung observed this same pattern. People with extraordinary perception often appeared before society was ready. Their personal struggles weren't just about them. They mirrored the struggles the whole culture would eventually have to face. Jung put it this way: what appears in the individual first, as psychological insight, later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. In other words, today's too sensitive, too intense, or too perceptive individuals may be carrying the very qualities that tomorrow's culture will desperately need. What they perceive before others. So what exactly do these highly perceptive individuals pick up on before the rest of us? Jung believed they were often sensing collective shadow material, the hidden contradictions, hypocrisies, and unspoken tensions of society. Cultural unsustainability, patterns of behavior that can't last, whether in relationships, organizations, or entire civilizations. New possibilities, spiritual, philosophical, or psychological insights that point toward the next stage of human growth. Consequences of denial, the fate that shows up when unconscious material isn't acknowledged. He argued that the symptoms these individuals carried often weren't personal flaws at all, but signals of what the whole culture needed to address. Service without martyrdom. One of Jung's most crucial insights was this: just because you see more doesn't mean you're required to suffer for it. He warned against becoming a martyr to consciousness. The goal, he insisted, wasn't to sacrifice yourself to your vision, but to learn how to carry it in a way that benefits others without destroying you. As he put it, the individuated person serves the collective not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole. This was the essence of individuation. Not hiding your perception, not letting it overwhelm you, but learning to wield it consciously. The story of Jung's patient. Remember Jung's patient from 1913, the introverted intuitive who could see everything and who initially felt like her gift was destroying her life. For 3 years, Jung worked with her through the individuation process. He helped her learn to differentiate what was hers from what she absorbed. He guided her through shadow integration so she could face her own unconscious instead of only pointing at others. And he taught her how to participate consciously with others without being consumed. The transformation was profound. She eventually found work as a counselor, where her differentiated perception became an asset rather than a liability. She built relationships with people who valued her insights instead of fearing them. And perhaps most importantly, she stopped experiencing her perception as a curse. Jung wrote of her, "The patient learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift hadn't changed, but her relationship to it had. What once isolated her, now allowed her to serve." The danger and the opportunity. Jung's most dangerous discovery was this: some people are born with consciousness that exceeds the collective readiness of their time. For them, life will always feel harder. They'll always see what others miss, and they'll always feel the pull of isolation. The danger is that without integration, this perception can destroy them. But the opportunity is that with integration, it can transform them into exactly what society needs: pioneers of consciousness who prepare humanity for its next stage of development. Your superior perception isn't a malfunction. It isn't proof that you're too much or too sensitive. It's an advanced feature of consciousness. The real question isn't whether you should suppress it to fit in. The real question is whether you'll learn to integrate it, to hold it consciously, wisely, and strategically. The ultimate integration. At the highest level of development, Jung described what he called the transcendent function. This is the stage where perception no longer feels like a burden or a weapon, but simply like part of who you are. People at this level see clearly without being attached to whether others understand. They can perceive deeply without feeling compelled to fix everything. They carry their insights lightly, offering them when appropriate, but no longer being consumed by them. This is what it looks like when perception becomes cultural medicine, when the gift serves not only the individual, but the collective, without ego, without martyrdom, and without collapse. Avoiding the pitfalls. To get there, Jung stressed the importance of vigilance. He warned that even highly developed individuals could slip back into old patterns: inflation, withdrawal, helper's identity, or overwhelm. Integration was not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing dance. He encouraged regular solitude, conscious boundaries, ongoing shadow work, and creative expression as practices to maintain balance. And above all, he urged the search for others who could truly see and support you, the few who understand. Why this matters today. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the highly perceptive, then you already know the struggles, the isolation, the misunderstandings, the sense of carrying too much. But Jung would want you to know something else. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not a problem to be fixed. You are part of a rare group that Jung believed essential for the future of humanity. You were born to see more, not to suffer in silence, but to contribute consciously to the evolution of human consciousness. A call to conscious pioneers. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't just that some people see everything. It was that most people who see everything never learn to use it wisely. The danger isn't in your perception. The danger is in failing to develop a conscious relationship with it. So if you recognize yourself here, remember this: your gift isn't the burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is the burden. With individuation, you can turn what once felt like a curse into exactly what the world needs. Because in Jung's words, what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. The world needs people who can bring unconscious material into awareness before it turns destructive. That is the role of the highly perceptive. That is your role, if you choose to develop it.